Hey guys, every now and then I come across a model that was a little bit of a wish list figure for me when I was a kid. And I know I say that about practically every miniature I paint on this channel, but this one wasn't a wish list model. This was always one of those models that I never got into. I always thought it looked a bit strange. It always seemed a little bit, like not the best sculpted model of all time. But sort of as I got older, I sort of gained a weird appreciation for these little guys. So let's come together and paint this to see what on earth I'm on about. I don't entirely know why I find these models oddly appealing, but they kind of are quite cool in their own sort of way. So these are harpies. They were originally released alongside the Dark Elf army for fourth edition. So this is way back when, right? And these miniatures never suited that range. They always kind of looked a little bit too monstery for the Dark Elf range, which was and typically very sort of lithe, very agile, very elf-like, very elegant, despite being sort of evil. Any monsters that were in the army tended to be of the large and scary variety, which is kind of how they contrasted well with the basic Dark Elf infantry, which were all about elegance and control and precision. So that kind of worked. So, for example, the Hydra looked really good next to the High Elf, next to the Wood Elf. There's practically every elf, isn't it? The Hydra looked really good next to the Dark Elf Beastmasters because of that contrast in size and sort of precision and skill. These ones always kind of looked weirdly. I guess the word is they look a bit mischievous, right? They look a little bit like they're up to no good. Um, they are very far from the sort of large, brutish kind of dichotomy that you typically got with other Dark Elf bound monsters. So it used to be pretty obvious why Dark Elves chose to bring big scary beasties like Hydras along to combat because they were obviously big and dangerous and hard to control, and there was something of the ruthlessness and scariness that I guess Dark Elves really appreciated. Not so these models. These guys I always thought looked a little bit mischievous, a little bit sort of impish, and so they never fit well with the Dark Elves. And sure enough, when Dark Elves were really released for 6th edition, they got a completely new harpy design, one that was, well, they were all females, which was an interesting choice. But they were also a lot more elegant, a lot more, a lot less barbaric than these guys. Let's put it that way. So what were these models good for then? I thought they were a great fit for the Warriors of Chaos army, specifically the combined Chaos army that came out in 5th edition. And in that role, they provided some really important, much needed support to the Chaos army, which at that point was entirely heavy infantry, sort of like skirmishers. Well, the Beastmen weren't skirmishers yet, to be fair. The Beastmen were also heavy infantry, oddly enough, just of a different type with multiple wounds per model and all sorts of good, great weapon choices like halberds and so on. But for the most part, the army lacked mobility. I think all they had at that point was fast cavalry, and fast cavalry are still no replacement for essentially flyers or units of light flyers the way Lizardmen had, the way High Elves had in the form of the Giant Eagles, the way Wood Elves had with their Warhawk Riders, and so on and so forth. So the Chaos Army definitely had an opening available for some kind of a light flyer that would be useful for disruption, useful for harassing war machines, maybe like sniping down enemy wizards and such like. So the Chaos Army was definitely in the market for that, and into this role, admirably, these models were co-opted. I don't think they were co-opted and put into there by choice. I don't think these were particularly popular models, but they, like I said, they do have a kind of mischievous, monstrous charm to them that kind of made them look the part next to suddenly the Beast units. But in a weird sort of way, they also look pretty decent next to the Chaos Warrior units because they were just so contrasting and different. Um, I guess the agile, they don't look ferocious. They just kind of look weird and impy, and kind of minion-like, which was just not a good fit for Dark Elves. But when it came to being subservient to Chaos Warriors, I think that was a better idea. I think the whole concept of them as being, flying scavengers fit really well with the idea of an all-conquering horde who was blazing its trail through civilization, and these guys would just land on the battlefield after the fight to sort of feast on survivors and that kind of thing. So very much a grotesque image, very vulture-like in that sense, and hopefully, I think you'll see why I find these models so amusing. Another little detail is, for the purposes of that 5th edition Chaos rulebook, I think they got a brand new all black and off sort of like deep brown hair kind of color scheme. I didn't love this though. So yeah, interesting. So these were clearly rejects from the Dark Elf army because those harpies got replaced, and then the harpies that they did get were eventually much more suited to the Dark Elf army, and then these guys were kind of a unit left without an army, and then they would go ahead and change the color scheme in a way that I felt didn't really suit the models, kind of hid a lot of the details and made them look just kind of messy and blobby. Wasn't great. Maybe they did it on purpose because, to be fair, these models were starting to look fairly dated by the time the rest of the Chaos Army rolled around. But to be honest, I like these guys, so as far as I was concerned, it was a step down to have the details hidden. Didn't really speak to a lot of the confidence, but at that point, I think the whole premise of Warhammer Fantasy was already quite sound, and I think people were collecting armies on the basis of effectiveness, not just on basically their appearance, which was typically the case back in the day. So yeah, interesting arc for this unit to take, and as a result, here I am painting him in 2024. So one thing I really found interesting about these guys back when they were working alongside the Dark Elf army was the fact that they had a color scheme that was essentially various shades of brown, just treated with different, I guess, glazes to make them interesting. So the base coat of these guys, the I guess the majority of these chaps, was this sort of weird fleshy tone. It was human-ish, but a little bit darker, and I thought that was a really interesting to go from. So this color that I'm using is a contrast paint analog of that particular color that was featured in the army book as well as in painting guides. This essentially is Fireslayer Flesh, which is my new favorite color that I'm experimenting a lot with, and I'm not sure if you noticed, but I'm starting to find ways to incorporate this color into my painting schemes. It's quite different from Guilliman Flesh, but also not terribly different. So that's not the most helpful description in the world. What exactly do I mean? I think when it comes to skin tones, it's actually very easy for us to differentiate them by eye, since humans are used to picking up differences in color based on our extensive experience observing human faces. So I feel this skin tone is a little bit too ruddy, a little bit too inhuman. I mean, to be fair, it was developed for dwarves, right? So that kind of makes a lot of sense. But I think there are added pigments in this paint that make it just shy of our ability to place it as a human skin tone. I don't think this really works as a skin tone color, but it is excellent for painting something that's a little bit monstery with that's still kind of human adjacent. Does it kind of make sense? So I like the idea of using this to sort of see how it shapes up as a skin tone for something that is kind of like almost a mockery of a human creature, and just uncanny valley enough to be a little bit creepy. Plus, the official color scheme for this with the Dark Elf army had really interesting use of tints and shades to sort of bring out an added dimension to this original base coat color. Not that they use Fireslayer Flesh, what I mean is that they used a color like this that was kind of human but off-puttingly different, is how I would describe it. So Fire Slayer Flesh, going over this just as a base coat, and you can sort of see that it kind of looks human, but it's a little bit too deep and dark in places. I feel a little bit too reddish and a little bit too off. It's a little bit hard to put my finger on why this is the case. I don't think this is because this is somehow another, you know, I don't think this is like a skin tone at all. It's a little bit too pink, and the shading is a little bit too brown. I would be hard pressed to find use for this, except in very niche cases. But for a monster, sure, that keeps it interesting, right? So I'll show you what I mean when I add a bit of white to it, or basically off grey, which is my usual, kind of equivalent for my undercoat, which is from a brand called Pylox. It's actually a car spray paint. It's essentially called grey white, and it's just a very warm sort of off grey color, slightly greenish even. When you sort of mix this in as a highlight, it starts to pale out in a really interesting way. It starts to get a little bit pinkish, and the end result is a model that kind of looks just really dirty. If none of this is making any sense to you at all, I completely understand where you're coming from, because I'm actually trying to just talk my way through why I find this such an interesting color scheme as well. I don't know, but something about it kind of works. There's a kind of pinkiness to it that's just really off-putting. Maybe it's because this guy is essentially the color of spam, and maybe something in my brain is just revolted by the idea of a spam colored creature. Maybe, but it looks kind of cool in a bizarre sort of way. And in the original color scheme, I think a very desaturated gray was used for the hair. I don't think I'll go down that route. I'll kind of adapt it slightly. I will go most likely for Grip Charger Gray, because in my opinion, a bit of blue would benefit just the uncanny valley strangeness of this miniature as a whole. So we're just going to lean into this color a little bit more and kind of sort of enjoy the strangeness. That's it. That's the title of the video. Enjoy the strangeness. Harpies, 5th edition. Enjoy the strangeness. Yeah, so I'm kind of enjoying just applying this color. Also, I mean, this model is just a really good break from all of the more complex color schemes that we've been seeing. All the great amounts of detail work on models like Nagash, like the 40k Carnifex. Let's just take a break and slow it down a little bit with a model that's essentially one colored, or well, two colored. I'm going to do the wings in a slightly different tone to keep it a bit more interesting. But yeah, I think this model has enough surface detail to keep the application of color interesting, but not too much detail that the model becomes like a bit tedious to paint. You see, the thing is, as much as I love like just building models, right? Like I find that they're so finely detailed that sometimes painting the detail, it kind of gets a bit muddy if you're not too careful. If you're not bringing your A game all the time, it can be easy to mess up just building models. Whereas this guy, he is just weird enough and yet funky enough that you kind of want to pick out every little grotesque bump or wart on his skin. Kind of really appealing to paint. I don't know what it is. Now, I did not feel this way about these models when I was younger. I detested these models with a passion. And now maybe I am kind of making up for lost time by coming back in to put just a really chill and enjoyable painting sort of guide to doing these weird little harpy beasts. So yeah, you can sort of see how it's getting pink. Yeah, it's too pink, isn't it? It's kind of off-puttingly grotesque, like a flying wad of lunch meat, right? Of spam air flying spam. Yeah, that's another possible like video title. just really gross. Yeah, I don't know. I would be the worst parent for my poor harpy baby, constantly telling him that he looks like spam. It's a tough life, but somebody's got to hear the truth. So yeah, harpies. Right. So harpies were useful for any number of tasks for the Warriors of Chaos army, right? The Warriors of Chaos army was really effective and really, just really hard hitting, really damaging on the battlefield. Lots of high strength weapons, lots of funky magic and so on. But it was also perpetually outnumbered, and the tactical flexibility of harpies, as well as their relatively low cost. I think these guys clocked in at about the same points cost as your average Chaos Warrior. I think, don't quote me on that. But yeah, so they did extend, the sort of number counts on the board. And even if they didn't increase the numbers of the army by a huge amount, what they were really good for was basically adding a lot of utility to the force. So these guys could be useful for, like I mentioned before, harrying war machines. They could punish like units of light cavalry trying to encircle and envelop the Chaos Army. They could be used to charge units of archers, lightly equipped troops. And they were just a real bully boy unit that was extremely useful, hunting down like lone characters like wizards and so on, who famously didn't wear armor, therefore were perfect targets for the many attacks. Relatively sort of average kind of strength and lots of wounds to soak up any return blows individual characters might have. So yeah, just an excellent all-round unit for utility for the Chaos Army. You could sort of see how this was really valued by the game designers, because every time you saw the Chaos Army appear in an episode of a battle report, an issue of White Dwarf, for a battle report, you would always see harpies, as many harpies as were in the studio collection. It was always the way they phrased it, simply because you really wanted these guys to sort of expand your options on a given turn. They could be used to also hunt down individual eagles. I've seen them used to stop a chariot just by landing on it from on high. The chariot could do nothing without its impact hits. And generally they were just really annoying at getting underfoot. And in a pinch, right? Like if the worst should happen, if all was lost and you had to sacrifice a unit, 5 harpies didn't cost very many points, and therefore you would just let them die. Besides, you would have something like 3 units given choice, so that you could use these to really sort of be force multipliers for the rest of the army. Really cool unit, and I really like these a lot. So we are getting to an interesting place with the skin on this model. It's kind of pinky and kind of like decayed and also slightly gross, like leprous almost. And yeah, I think you begin to see the point about why I would never use this as human skin, because it's just, there's not enough of a natural rosiness to this color, I feel, to be used as a skin tone. Maybe you could use this to shade models which are, but it doesn't bring the right color to a shade as well. I find that human skin, just as an analog, if you want to shade it further, you would want to add a warmer color than this. This color seems to have a lot of blue in it, and that sounds slightly psychopathic, but when you sort of break down human skin into your RGB, right, or your cyan, magenta, teal, this appears to be a color that has a little bit too much teal in it to be useful as a skin tone. And so as a result, I would much prefer using this for something just weird and uncanny valley like this harpy, who I think is looking pretty handsome, such that it is. So one last highlight. Again, this takes us into off-putting grey territory, but it's only going to be on the very extremities. And I think we begin to sort of see a little bit of how this color scheme will emerge once we drop a little bit of Gryph Charger Grey into it. So just making sure that we get all the little intricacies on the skin. So this model, I believe, is Trish Morrison sculpt, Trish Carden sculpt. She had a very distinctive style for doing monsters. I haven't looked this up specifically, but I would be willing to bet money that this is a Trish Carden sculpt because this is from the time of Marauder Miniatures, which was when she formed a satellite miniatures company under the auspices of Brian Ansell, and this was together with her then husband, Ellie Morrison, who is another famous sculpting name. So Trish Morrison has a very specific style when she comes to sculpt things like trolls and harpies and imps and so on. She liked to really lean into the monstrous aspects of it, and these models, though I mean admittedly not popular at the time, have really grown on me since. I think they just have a real charm about them. Like they really look like something out of Labyrinth or some other related fantasy movie. A real strangeness about them, very Jim Henson's almost, and something I didn't appreciate when I was younger. But now when I look at this model, I'm like, I get this model now. So this is me trying to atone for years of neglect for my poor boy over here, and giving it a paint job worthy of the dark powers. I see something of a flying monkey kind of situation here, kind of like the Wizard of Oz. Yeah, fly my stupids, and then they'll fly off and like go, you know, like violate chariots and so on. Okay, cool. So again, putting a little bit more care into the feet because these feet are just so large and grotesquely designed that you really have to love them for being so lovingly put together by someone who truly cared about making the most disgusting feet that she could. Again, I think this is a Trish Carden sculpt. It's got all the hallmarks. Yeah, okay, cool. So tempting to go on refining the skin further and further, but maybe we should give it a rest for now. Cool. So it's gotten very, very pale, right? And the original color scheme was not quite so pale. And what we're going to do is we're just going to come in with the Fire Slayer Flash again to sort of cut down the highlights just a little bit, just to kind of tint and reassign some of the colors, redouble some of the colors in some of these areas, and to make sure that everything is nicely shaded and blended. So as I apply this touch up second coat of contrast paint, I'm only applying this quite gently. I'm not swamping the surface for sure. I'm only sort of very carefully glazing it in areas where it's needed and making sure to help all the little boils and pustules stand out correctly. In many ways, the surface of this model kind of shares some kinship with a lot of the Plague Bearer models. And I don't think that's by accident, because this model is designed to evoke revulsion in a way. And I think it does a really good job of that. Like, you're meant to think of like vultures when you look at this thing. Not something that is inherently corrupted, but something with loathsome habits. And I think that's kind of perfect for the idea of a harpy, or at least a Warhammer harpy, which were generally, crone-like monstrosities that would fly around. And they'd be misshapen and disgusting. Kind of like if you got a kid to draw a vulture. This is what they might imagine, because they imagine it being extremely hideous and malformed and disfigured. And just on account of its diet, not the most pleasant creature to spend a mealtime with. Cool. So we are getting to a point where we can come in with the other tone, which I have picked out to be Rattling Grime. Rattling Grime will be the dark counterpoint to the flesh tone for the inside of the wings membranes, the membranous bits of the wings, as you can see. And this really is chosen with care because it is extremely desaturated, kind of got a lot more gray going on, and in that sense helps to balance the vivid pinkness of the skin in a way that kind of offsets it really well. And all the praise that I'm giving this color scheme, I mean, none of this was chosen by me, right? This is just working off that artwork from 4th edition Dark Elves, and I'm just trying to mimic that to the best of my ability. There are other interesting choices that are made with this color scheme as well. In a bit, I will show you that it incorporates some unconventional colors in places you would not expect, which is kind of nice. Yeah, so a very nuanced and controlled color scheme using a limited palette, but trying to inject as much interest into the palette as possible. And of course, there is just the one deviation by me, which you will see shortly when I do it. That's basically the incorporation of Gryphhound Grey into the color scheme in order to add a little bit of blue, just to make him look that much more off-putting. At least I assume it's a hint. I'm not sure. It's hard to tell with these monstery dudes. But yeah, definitely more appropriate looks-wise as a creature of chaos than something the Dark Elves would necessarily be able to even communicate with, because just visually they never matched. So coming over to this side, applying this very, very carefully, I see that I'm going to have to come in and restate some of the highlights, reinstate some of the highlights. Oops, I missed an entire spoke on this wing. Over here, an entire missing metatarsal in its original color. Oops. We'll fix that shortly. And let's jump over to this side. So yeah, this is a really sort of chill miniature to paint. It's not the most complicated thing in the world, but it does have very pleasing surface textures that we can sort of come in and work over with minute detail. Very pleasing miniature indeed to sort of render. And it's going to be quirky looking no matter what we do, right? So kind of if there's any sentiments about how this might turn out, I mean, as far as I'm concerned, all bets are off. I know how I roughly want it to look, but I'm also not getting too caught up because there isn't a lot of fine detail to sort of bring up. Painting it's going to be a relatively chill experience, just more of a marathon rather than a race, and a short marathon at that, because this model isn't very large. It's kind of it's smaller than a Chaos Warrior, to be honest. And to be fair, a lot of its size, it's mostly wing. So yeah, very pint-sized, as it were, but also effective. I don't remember whether these guys were 15 points or 22 points. They might be 22 points. They might be a little bit more expensive on account of the fact that they were flying around. But generally speaking, they had 0 armor, and they were just not the most reliable troops. They tended, unless I'm mistaken, they had a very low leadership score, which I guess represents the fact that they are cowardly scavengers. Now into the belly, I'm doing a bit of this skeleton horde, and you sort of see how that kind of works with the color scheme a little bit, right? Like there's a little bit of sallow. It gives it a kind of a sallow appearance, like it's basically there's something wrong with its belly and it's kind of rotting somewhat. Really, really like the way this color scheme did stuff like that. And I'm going to come back in to try to fix those parts of the wings that I inadvertently covered in rattling grime. So just a bit of a touch up. before we give that belly a second coat with Skeleton Horde to reinstate the color, strengthen the color somewhat. Yep. This is the spoke that I missed out. I call it a spoke because it kind of reminds me of an umbrella. Sorry guys, we are back after a minor interruption. So, yes, now we are coming in with Skeleton Horde to redefine the belly. I wonder whether this will be strong enough to be visible. If not, I might have to use a slightly stronger color. I think that's alright. Sometimes I figure things out as I say them. I call it brain lag. Okay. Absolute weirdness. Cool. Now we're going to jump in with a little bit of Gryphcharger Grey. So this is the part that I mentioned. As is my way, I always try to figure out whether there's an opportunity to add cool color to a miniature, just to sort of pace out the warmth of it a little bit, just to visually space it out with a bit of separation. And this isn't going to be very blue. I'm just going to apply this as the base coat, making sure that I get it, most importantly, into all the base, sort of like the separation points at the base of the nails, and then let that dry fully, and then after that come back in to highlight, probably with something that's more of a bone color. So the only time you're ever going to see this blue tone is at the very base of the nail beds, because I think that kind of gives it a little bit of an extra bit of pizzazz, as much as a horrible flying harpy could give you pizzazz or add pizzazz to a color scheme. So yeah, so these models came as two parts, right? Which is why the pose, I guess, is a little bit on the stiff side. He's got the main body, and then after that the wings were one complete piece that, you know, had to be bent into, well, they didn't have to, you could just sort of glue them on in a straight sort of way, but I always thought that they look best once you sort of bend them into more of a natural organic shape, kind of the way I've done for this guy. So a little bit more of a V shape when you sort of look at it from the top. I hope you can see that. Yeah, so I'm wondering whether I want to use this color for the hair as well, but I don't think that's a good choice, because too much of a good thing can make it look a little bit incoherent. I think the hair is another opportunity to add another color, or else keep it understated, but I'll have a think about it. Yeah, once I sort of block in all these areas. Yeah. As far as the eye is concerned, I'm going to be doing this in red, just because I want even the slightest tie-in with a Chaos Army, which often featured a lot of red. So yeah, let's do that. And then we'll pop on a little yellow dot in the middle of that for the actual emphasis, to emphasize the middle of the eye. And I think that looks alright. I did miss out putting a bit of Gryphcharger onto his mouth, his teeth. And he's got kind of like almost like T-Rex like teeth. Kind of awesome. Not quite the mouth of a scavenger like a hyena, but well, not far off either. One more time, we're going to go back with the bone to create this cross on his belly. Yeah, and I think that looks alright. Hair. Oh, I actually see a bit of a mist area at the back, so I'm going to come back in with a little bit more dwarf flesh, or rather fire slayer flesh. I suppose a fire slayer is a dwarf, some description. And over here on this spoke, which I kind of missed out on earlier, a little bit more fire slayer flesh to reinstate a little bit more of that reddish hue. So bring that back into prominence. Yep. Cool. So as promised, a bit of bone, but a lighter shade. So I'm going to mix some of this Vallejo dark sand together with silver grey. That's a nail that I didn't apply any to, but you can sort of, I guess it's a really good opportunity to sort of see the difference that blue nail bit will make to the look of the claw. Perhaps not much at all, but you know, I know it's there. You know it's there now that I've told you. Will you remember? Maybe not, but that's fine. I think it's a little bit more obvious on this horn. Sort of like the roots of the horn are a little bit grey and moldy and slightly cool colored. A bit like the inside of a snail shell. Well, a sea snail anyway. Regular snail shells probably aren't that color. Terrestrial snails, that is. And yeah, a little bit more up here. So yeah, I think most Chaos armies that were fairly competitive. In fact, I think most tournament 4th edition Chaos armies, of which there were relatively few, because I think Chaos was just a really hard army to use in that context. Yeah, most 4th edition Chaos armies featured tons of harpies because they proved to be such a good deterrent for all of the little things that kind of bedeviled the process of playing a very elite, very high cost, very low numbers kind of army. So it was really nice to see like the entire army essentially get a lease of life from the addition of some low cost flying chaff, which was extremely useful and was an almost auto include with every army. It was just a question of not whether you wanted to have any, it's a case of how many units you wanted to have. And the answer was always all that you have in your collection, please. I think it's for this reason that another reason why I didn't have such a strong affinity with these models back when I was collecting Warhammer was because because I had the Dark Elf army, but I never really got these guys because, well, first of all, I mean, to be honest, I didn't like the look of them back then. I always thought that they were a bit out of sync with the elegance of Dark Elf army. The elegance and speediness. These guys looked a little bit lumpen and a little bit crude in comparison, which ironically makes them perfect for a Chaos army. But also the fact that, well, I live in Singapore, and frankly, Singapore didn't have a lot of hobby stores. Trying to track enough of these guys down to create a unit was always a challenge because they were always hard to find and they always were sold out relatively quickly. And to do a unit of these, you will need most armies, Chaos armies would have no less than 15 of these guys. 3 units of 5, right? Just to flap around and be annoying. But yeah, it was really quite hard to get enough of them. I do know that there were a few Chaos enthusiasts living in Singapore, so maybe they were the ones who swiped them all up. You know who you are, guys. I'm not naming any names, but I think you know who you are. And it was therefore always difficult to get hold of these guys. So putting a little bit more detail on the belly, create that almost like the look of a dragon's belly. Just another little bit of detail to make it look all the more inhuman and unsettling. It's the idea that it's got large scales over its stomach. So ties into the idea that all scavengers have this kind of, they have like almost like a fixation on keeping the stomach safe, which was just, I mean, that comes from nowhere in the natural world. That's just, I think, something that comes from like stories like Lord of the Rings and so on. Sort of like soft underbelly. I am trying to find the Silicanum Grey, which I think is the color that I will use for his hair. Pardon me if he's kind of vibrating slightly right now. Just pop onto the vortex mixer. Sorry for the noise. I know it's a little bit off-putting. And then we'll come in, and then we'll put that onto his hair, and we can sort of take stock of where we've ended up. Because I think this guy is starting to look a lot like what I expected him to look like, which is great. Meets expectations, tick. With the exception of one last area, which was something I didn't quite appreciate when I was younger, but now that I'm older and have a little bit more understanding of how colors work and how they contrast and play on our expectations, I really enjoy now. So what this is a touch of orange. Yeah, I know. Orange. Where on this model would orange go? And it turns out it's the feet. So a little bit well diluted of orange on the feet. And then you kind of drag it up. Nicely diluted. Not too thick. Just glaze this over the surface. And I think what this does is it puts us in the mind of things like condors and like vultures and the like, who may not be the most colorful birds in the world, but usually have some kind of redness about their body. I think condors in particular have orangish talons. Orangish, is that a word? Orange colored talons, or something somewhere along those lines. Yeah, but I think this, if anything, puts it well into inhuman territory. And this is on the original color scheme as well. I did not invent this, but I am loving the way it's turning out and transforming the model before my eyes. It's kind of off-putting in a really pleasing way. So yeah, it doesn't need to be extremely orange, just enough to suggest that subtle change of hue. And I think I'm now strongly considering replicating it on the hands, but I think that may be too much. So I will probably leave off. I might mull over it for a few days, and I still might change it in time if the inclination so strikes me. But I'm going to go on to apply final highlights now for the claws, because I want these to be as sharp looking and as visible as possible. So I'm going to lean in and just give it a little bit of a light flick of color. The horns. Horn singular, sorry. It's just the one horn. Thumbnail. Smallest finger. Middle finger. Index finger. Index finger. Middle finger. Smallest finger. And thumbnail. And I was really tempted to do something to the belly just there. Probably not, because I don't want it to be the same level of brightness as this claw color, this claw highlight. So yeah, there we go. I think maybe the Basilicanum. So I always struggle a little bit with Basilicanum Grey, because I always think that it's a little bit too dark. It always tends to be almost black. And from the way I hear people use Basilicanum Grey, apart from being impossible to pronounce, Basilicanum Grey has a tendency to be used as a shade for metals. So that should tell you how dark it is. I always feel that it's a little bit too intense, a little bit too dark to be more generically useful, but it's a good utility color. Can't say I would have it on my to buy list. I will get that video out one day, guys, just that list of recommended colors, in case you couldn't infer from the way I paint which colors I already endorse. I think you should be able to, but you know, just to put all that information concisely in one place, I will do a video for that at some point, talking about just my favorite colors. So, a little bit more on that horn. Nice bright teeth. It is, after all, the business end. And the final resting point, I assume, of all the harpies enemies. This particular harpy anyway, since it's alive, it must have had quite a string of victories, or else glorious retreats. Probably more glorious retreats, all things considered. And how does that look? Opinions, guys? Format does not compute. Just some final highlights. And I hope you sort of see where I was going with this color scheme. I think it's fairly attractive, actually. Not attractive as in a human sort of way, but I think the colors really bring the model to life. Really give you the semblance of being a living creature. To some extent, suggests some rather unsavory habits on the part of this creature, because it's so dark in places and it's so dingy. It really looks like this creature has been rooting around in corpses and just being a dirty fellow. Yeah, I like highlights along the wings, these vertical wing bones, I suppose, would be a better way of calling them, of pointing them out, than, I guess, struts. The way this was like in a way, this reminds me of an umbrella. That's where that comes from. Struts. But yeah, there we go. Alright guys, that's our harpy. I think he looks pretty good. You know, not the most complicated color scheme in the world, but that orange near the ankles really sets it off. And that weird yellowish bone-colored belly, I think, is very appealing as well. So let me know your thoughts, and let me know how you feel about these models. I know they're not the most popular figures in the world. Certainly every Dark Elf player I knew migrated over to the new ones, myself included. But for every Chaos player, I think these were the default option for the longest time, unless you were playing Slanesh, in which case you would use the girls as well. But I kind of like these guys. This guy has a little bit of MMA fighter stance to him. It's not his fault. He's a good-looking boy nonetheless. Alright guys, cheers, enjoy yourself, keep on painting, like, comment, subscribe, all that good stuff if you've enjoyed this video, and see you in the next one. Bye-bye!